Students, today we are going to discuss the poem In Memory of W.B. Yeats written by W.H. Auden. In my previous video, I have already given you a brief introduction of the author, the famous poet W.H. Auden, and also some main points regarding this poem about its introduction. I have told you that this poem is in three sections, is written in three sections, and each section follows a different stanza form and rhyme scheme. So let's begin with the first section of the poem. The title of the poem indicates and is quite explicit that the poem is written in memory of William Butler Yeats, the famous Irish poet of 20th century. This poem is a kind of an elegy. It's a kind of a prayer and also an obituary. So let's begin with the text. He disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted, and snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. Oh, all the instruments agree. The day of his death was a dark, cold day. So, in these first 5 or 6 lines, Auden is describing about the wintry afternoon of the death of the poet W.B. Yeats. He disappeared. He here stands for W.B. Yeats. He disappeared means he died in the dead of winter, means he died on a very cold day. It was a wintry day. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted, and it was so cold that the rivers were frozen. And because of too much cold, no one was present on the airports and they were almost deserted, empty. And snow disfigured the public statues. There was snowfall, and when the snow settles on the public statues, they got disfigured. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. Dying day. So he personifies day as if day is a person, a human being. Here, dying day means when the day is coming to its end, or we can say, in other words, the evening time. So, the mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day means the temperature lowered further in the barometer during evening time. Oh, all the instruments agree means all the instruments or mechanical devices to measure temperature, they agree or they indicates the day of his death was a dark cold day. The day of the death of W.B. Yeats was a very dark cold day. So in a way, Auden um, he just describes in dramatic setting the death of the day, the day of the death of Yeats. It was a wintry afternoon and there were rumors of his illness and death. So the next lines are like this. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forests. The peasant river was untempted by the fashionable quays. By mourning tongues, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forests. This means that nature remains unaffected by the death of W.B. Yeats. Or, in other words, we can say that nature goes on as usual. Wild wolves ran through the forests as usual. The free flowing rivers, the peasant rivers means the free flowing rivers, they remain untempted, or uh, that river was not attracted by the fashionable quays. Quays means the harbors. By mourning tongues, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. So people mourn at the death of the poet. By mourning tongues means people mourned at the death of the poet. And though the poet had died, or we can say that is gone forever, but his poems will survive even after his death, because art can never die, because art is immortal. The death of the poet was kept from his poems. Though the poet died, but his poems will survive forever, because art never dies. Then the next stanza, but for him it was his last afternoon as himself, an afternoon of nurses and rumours. The provinces of his body revolted, the squares of his mind were empty. Silence invaded the suburbs. The current of his feeling failed. He became his admirers. So, in the first stanza, W.H. Auden describes the wintry afternoon of W.B. Yeats' death. Then he describes or writes about nature, and he personifies it. And he says that even nature remains indifferent to his death. And according to him, uh, it was a very it was not anything important happens on that day. It was an ordinary day like any other day, a cold day. Then here in this stanza he says, but for him it was his last afternoon as himself. So Yeats' condition gets deteriorated, and it was quite obvious that it was his last day of life on the earth. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself. As himself means as a human being. It was his last afternoon. An afternoon of nurses and rumors. It was an afternoon when nurses were very busy. Nurses moved actively from this way to that way, and people talked of his illness and imminent death. There were rumors of his death. The provinces of his body revolted. Now, here, Auden uses a metaphysical conceit, and he says that Yeats is like an emperor, and his body, his empire, his province. So he says the provinces of his body revolted. Yeats was like an emperor, and different parts of his body are the different provinces of his empire. So his mind and body revolted against his authority. And with the result that dissolution and disintegration set in. So, first of all, what happens? The squares of his mind were empty. First of all, the his mind becomes inactive. The squares of his mind were empty. Silence invaded the suburbs. So, first of all, he became unconscious. His mind was affected and he was unable to, uh, the receptivity of his mind was affected in a way. Then, silence invaded the suburbs. Now, here, suburb means the actually suburb means the outer areas, but here it means the his limbs, his hands and feet. So, silence invaded means he became, uh, numbness invaded his uh, limbs, his hands and feet. They become numb. The current of his feeling failed. And finally, he became unconscious. He became his admirers. And now onwards, he will become what his admirers want him to be like. So, what happens? He became unconscious, and so the current of feeling failed. But he will be what the people think of him. And then what he will become? He will become what his admirers want him to be. Then in the next lines, Auden writes, now he is scattered among 100 cities and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections. To find his happiness in another kind of food and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. Now he is scattered among 100 cities. He is scattered means his work, his art, his poetry. Now his poetry will be read by different people in different parts of the world and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections. So, from now onwards, his poetry will be read in unfamiliar, unknown countries and judged and condemned, or we can say evaluated, according to the foreign tastes and standards of art. Now he is scattered among 100 cities means his verse or his poetry, it will get scattered in different countries, in different parts of the world, and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections. And his work, it will be judged by the readers, who will be all strangers. To find his happiness, happiness means his publicity, to find his happiness in another kind of wood means his poetry will be analyzed in the world of art according to and be punished under a foreign code of conscience means according to, or it will be judged by people of foreign countries according to the rules of art of that particular country. This means that his poems will be evaluated, criticized, or appreciated by people of different countries according to the rules of art unknown to the poet himself. So, in this way, the words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. Means his poetry or the words of a dead man means the poetry of the dead poet, it will be now interpreted. Modified means interpreted according to those who are living. So, students, that's all for today. Tomorrow we'll continue with the next stanza of this poem. Thank you.